Before the 2024 election, Drew Stanecki was always reading the news on his phone. He's 36, lives in Virginia, and was obsessed with following the presidential race. But after the election, that totally changed.
I turned off my notifications on my phone for all my news apps. I didn't want anything pushed to me.
He was feeling overwhelmed and really upset about the results. So he decided to unplug from all the news to avoid what he felt like he could not control. And then Drew noticed a big shift in himself.
My brain is just quieter. I've just enjoyed that mental space of not turning over, the possibilities of what's going to be happening in the world next, and just kind of focusing on the stuff that's like my community, right? Like my family, and checking in with my friends, and checking in with my sisters and my parents. And there's just so many other places I can put my energy towards, and they just feel so much more productive than absorbing the news at this point.
Based on my reporting, Drew's not alone in this. I recently interviewed people who've been avoiding the news, but also disconnecting from a lot of apps on their phones. That decision to unplug from their phones has shown them the hold that these beeps and interruptions have on our brains.
I'd had my daughter in 2015, and I noticed that I was spending a lot of late nights with her where she would be looking up at me and I was looking down at my phone.
This is Catherine Price. She's the author of the book, How to Break Up with Your Phone. And I wanted to talk with Catherine about this because she's done all this research around how to create a better relationship with your phone and all the apps it has. This work is inspired by her own experience with realizing how much time she was spending distracted.
So I decided to turn that personal issue into a professional project. I wrote How to Break Up with Your Phone, and basically it looks at how and why our phones are so hard to look away from, and then gives a plan for what we can do to try to take back control so we can actually have a relationship in which we keep the good parts and then get rid of the stuff that makes us feel bad.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Elahe Izadi. It's Wednesday, January 15th. Today, how to reset your relationship with your phone. And yeah, I know you're probably listening to me on your phone right now, but I talk with Catherine about how to set healthy boundaries with our phones and stick to them. These devices, the way I think of them is they allow us to plug in instantly to the whole world, the universe. They're right in our hands. So what are some of the main impacts that you've observed in your work that these devices have on us, that the fact that they are so readily accessible to us?
There are obviously many benefits to smartphones, and I don't think most people would want to get rid of their smartphones, in part because so much of daily adult life now requires your smartphone, even just to park or check your bank account.
Right.
But with that said, there's all these effects that our interactions with our devices are having on us, often on a subconscious level, that I think are really harming a lot of different aspects of our lives. I think a lot of that has to do with the way that our devices and their apps are designed to fragment our attention, whether it is taking us out of our real life experience and getting us to focus our attention even momentarily on the phone itself, or it's what we do within apps where we are looking at different pieces of content in a particular feed, say different news stories all on different subjects or different social media posts, or we're swiping between apps in search of new information because of all of the dopamine triggers that are built into our apps. So this fragmentation of attention, I think, is really having a very, very negative effect on our ability to do things like think deeply or to connect with people around us, or even to derive enjoyment and pleasure from the real world around us, because honestly, it's much less stimulating in many ways than the content that we're getting fed to us on our phones. So I've really been personally very disturbed to think about and learn more about the potential effects of this fragmented attention. So if you're not paying attention to something, you're not going to remember it. If you're at your child's sports game and they score a goal, but you were checking your work email, you weren't really there and you're not going to have a memory of it. And so I don't think it's unreasonable to think that the constant distractions of our phones are actually inhibiting our ability to form long-term memories.
Can you unpack for me a little bit about how phones are designed to distract us? What is it about them that is so distracting? Or I even think like captivating. I'm not alone. I feel like in the feeling of I pick up my phone and then an hour or two goes by. I don't even know where the time went. What is it about this thing that does that to people?
I think this is becoming much better known these days, but there's a very simple reason for that, which is that if you have an app that's advertising based or that in some way benefits if you spend time on it, then obviously the goal of that app maker is going to get you to spend more time on it. And the way that you do that is actually quite simple in theory. You take advantage of our brain's dopamine systems. So dopamine is a chemical that our brains release as a way to indicate when something is worth doing again. So if a behavior triggers the release of dopamine, we will be driven to repeat it, regardless of whether it's something we actually want to do. That's great if dopamine is helping you to do something like eat to survive or, procreate so the species doesn't go extinct. But there's nothing discriminatory about our dopamine systems. Like anything that triggers it is just going to release it. So that means that if you want to create a product that hooks people, all you need to do is pack dopamine triggers into your product's design. And that's exactly what app makers do. And I think that actually the kind of pinnacle of this type of design is the slot machine. Slot machines are packed with dopamine triggers specifically to get people to not get up and stop gambling. That becomes really concerning when you recognize that smartphones are designed to mimic slot machines.
Oh, I never thought of that before. Like it's like a slot machine in my hand.
No, yeah, exactly. So once you start to recognize dopamine triggers, it's actually really useful because you'll start to see that they're all over your phone, and then you can start to take steps to reduce them, to try to make your phone boring. So just a couple examples of dopamine triggers: bright colors. So if you think about a slot machine, lots of bright colors. Mm-hmm. If you think about your home screen, it's probably lots of bright colors. Mm-hmm. All the colors on your phone were chosen by somebody specifically to grab your attention. Like, just look at the red of the notification badge. It's the same red as blood, and it's the same red as stop signs. It's like really chosen.
Attention.
Exactly. And you also have things like novelty, huge dopamine trigger. Anytime you pick up your phone, you're going to find something new. Unpredictability is a huge trigger. You'd think we would want to always find a positive thing, and that would be what would compel us to repeat a behavior. But actually, what's known as intermittent rewards, like once in a while you get rewarded, it's even more powerful.
Yeah.
All of these are dopamine triggers, and they're all very deliberately incorporated into our phones to make us keep coming back to these apps, because that is how they make money.
What about some of the other negative impacts that this constant access to our phones, and especially social media, has? What has been documented of those impacts?
I think people are becoming more and more aware of the mental health effects of some of our most popular and time-sucking apps, and social media in particular, and particularly for teen girls. But it makes total sense on an intuitive level. If you think about it, the average American teen is spending something like 5 hours a day just on social media, which is 70 full days a year, by the way. But if you're spending that much time looking at feeds of idealized images that are being fed to you by algorithms that are able to figure out within minutes or even seconds, what to show you to get you to stay on the app, you can see how that could go bad very quickly. And I think all of us could stand to ask ourselves, how do we feel when we spend a lot of time scrolling through social media? Like, what does it mean to be showing ourselves these images of idealized, fake, in many cases, people? I mean, like literally fake, like a lot of it is becoming AI generated. What is that doing to us?
I do want to push back a little bit on the idea that people do even need to break up with their phones, because like you said, that there are positives to having smartphones. For me, honestly, one thing when I was thinking about my own relationship to my phone is that I have very dear close friends who live on the other side of the country who I feel like are totally connected to my daily life in a way that 20 or even 15 or 10 years ago, they weren't. Like, I know exactly what's going on in their day-to-day. They know what's going on in mine. Like, we're able to talk throughout the day or, just keep up with each other. And I wonder, is there a way to maintain these types of close relationships using this tool without also letting the tool take over your life and take over your attention?
Yeah, so I think that this boils down to what feels good on an individual level. So I'm not here to prescribe the best way to keep in touch with your friends, but some thoughts and observations that might be helpful to people. One kind of guiding idea I keep in mind is to think about whether, it's kind of a strange way to phrase it, but whether my energy is going through the phone to another person or if it's getting stuck in the phone in kind of a doom scrolly or mindlessly scrolling kind of way. So if I'm using my phone to call a friend or text a friend, I think that's a good use of the phone. Honestly, I think that I always feel better after a phone call versus texting. So that's another test I do for myself. What type of interaction makes me feel the most fulfilled? So I have a constant reminder to myself that like, oh, maybe I should, once you get to like 7 messages you've been pinging back and forth, maybe just call them for a minute. And then as for social media, I think people have different opinions on this. Personally, I don't find it that fulfilling to, quote, keep up with friends by seeing social media posts because first, it gets my energy kind of stuck in the phone. It's like a state of consumption rather than interaction. And so I don't like that aspect. But I also don't really like the fact that it's asynchronous, meaning it's not happening in real time back and forth. It's kind of what they posted, hours or days ago. And there's also an element of performance to it that I don't personally like because, we put our best selves forward on social media. We put these kind of, in many cases, idealized versions of our lives. And personally, I find it much more fulfilling to have a personal text exchange or ideally a phone call with that friend. So again, I don't want to dictate what's right for you, but those are some of the guidelines I use in my own life.
After the break, Catherine shares her practical tips on how to actually break up with your phone. We'll be right back. Well, so Catherine, let's say I've decided I want to break up with my phone. I want to reorient and change my relationship with my phone. How do I go about doing this?
I really recommend that you start by asking yourself why you want to change your relationship with your phone, which might sound obvious, but a lot of people dive right into making changes to their settings or just trying to restrict things without really knowing why they're doing it. And this happens a lot around New Year's. This kind of arbitrary, I just should spend less time on my phone. I think this year it might be a little different because as the person you interviewed was pointing out, I think a lot of people are suffering from total burnout from the news in particular. So there might be a bit more awareness of, oh my God, I need to take a break from this because I'm going, like, it's just not good for my mental health. But one thing I recommend to people do that is playful, but actually is surprisingly effective is to actually start by writing a breakup note to your phone. So like sit down and like literally say like, dear phone. I mean, this is how my book starts. I wrote a parody breakup letter to my phone, but actually write a note and just say, what did you like about your relationship? But then also what wasn't working? What annoyed you? What made you mad? Just get that down on paper. And I've had a lot of people do this and it's so interesting because it starts playful, and then people get very vulnerable and real in these letters. And it really clarifies, A, that it's a relationship, and B, what people want and how they've been kind of hurt by their prior relationship. Also ask yourself, what do you want to be spending your attention on? I mean,
not just cutting things out, but what do you want to fill it up with, right?
Exactly. Like I actually had a bracelet made for myself that says pay attention, because one of my messages that I took personally from writing this book was our lives are what we pay attention to. And so, when you make a decision in the moment about what to pay attention to, that adds up to your life.
So once you have that sort of philosophical framework of why you're doing this and what it is you want to cut out and what you want to bring in, well, what are some practical things that you can then do?
So once you have this positive framework established for yourself and you know what your goals are, that's when I would suggest making changes to your phone and your physical environment to make this boundary setting easier for yourself. So in terms of physical things you can do, please get your phone out of your bedroom at night. It is messing with your sleep. You are probably using it as your alarm clock. That means that you are touching your phone first thing in the morning to make the alarm turn off. And that means that you're being hijacked by whatever is waiting on your phone when you wake up. So one of my top tips, which is very obvious, but many people haven't done it, get your phone out of your bedroom and get a standalone alarm clock. I also recommend establishing spaces in your life that are no phone zones, quote unquote, kind of like the quiet car on Amtrak, where it's just a rule that's been established in advance. If you break it, you're the jerk. Like if you talk on the phone in the quiet car, you're a jerk.
Yeah. If you talk on the phone in yoga class, then you're a jerk.
Exactly. And so, I would highly recommend making the bedroom in general a no phone zone, but certainly dinner table, meal times. If you're a parent, yes, this should apply to your kids, but it should apply to you as well. And you can decide if it makes sense to also have some of these no phone zones in meetings or, in your workplace. Anyway, these physical boundaries that actually establish some kind of etiquette about when and where it's appropriate to use our devices. And then I would say for the phone itself, take a minute to redesign your home screen. Like probably your home screen just has this collection of apps that got put there in whatever order they were downloaded in. And probably some of your most problematic slot machine apps are right there staring at you in the face. So I redesigned my own home screen so that it's black. I don't even have a picture of my family or my dog or anything. And then I don't have any apps on it. They're all in the app library, so that I have to actually pull down the top bar and search for apps in order to open them. And that adds an element of intentionality that I find very useful. I'd also recommend exploring some of the app blocking apps and devices that are out there. There's a bunch of them that I've used or people have recommended, like the Brick or Unplug, which are physical devices that can help you kind of block apps on command so that you can turn your phone into a tool. Highly recommend those. And you need those for now because the phone makers, unfortunately, haven't given us a good way to actually block access to apps or to the web browser. So until that happens, take advantage of the third-party tools. Some of them are free. And then if you want one other suggestion there, I came up with an exercise I call WWW, and that's short for what for, why now, and what else. And it's basically a way, again, to make your phone checks more intentional. Because that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to arbitrarily restrict phone time. We're trying to keep the good parts of our phone and make sure that when we use it, it's a conscious choice. And the basic idea is that if you notice yourself reaching for your phone, you ask yourself these 3 questions. What for? Which is like, what did you pick it up to do? Did you have an actual purpose, like sending an email or buying something or calling a friend? Then you ask yourself, why now? So there might be an actual time-sensitive reason, like you needed to send that email or you're, looking up something on the map app that you need to get to. But in many cases, it's going to be emotional. It's going to be something like, I don't know, I was like bored for 2 seconds, so I reached for my phone, or I felt anxious, or I felt lonely. Like, what's the emotional reason? And then once you kind of figure out what you're after, you can move on to the third step of what else. So that is basically like, what else could you do in that moment to get the same reward that your brain is seeking? I always like to stare out a window if I need a kind of to zone out for a minute, or going for like a quick walk, even just getting up from your desk if you need a distraction. And I always also like to say, like, you may decide you want to do nothing, which is really important. Our brains definitely need more downtime to process the fire hose of information that we are subjecting them to at all times. But then also, like, if you go through that WWW, what for, why now, what else process, and you decide you want to be on your phone, that is great. That's exactly what we're trying to do, is just make sure it's intentional. So I also really like to encourage people to be kind to yourself about this. We're up against very powerful forces, and just recognize that, like, what's right for me may not be right for you, and vice versa. And it'll be an ongoing process of trying to refine your relationship, because no relationship is ever perfect.
Well, yeah, and what resonates a lot with me is this idea, like you said, is just prompting self-reflection and it not be this prescriptive one-size-fits-all thing. I'm also wondering, though, Catherine, you wrote this book, How to Break Up with Your Phone, before there was a global pandemic that forced many of us to spend way more time on our devices than we might like. And have you been able to stick with the habits that you developed as you were working on this book? And what have you learned since writing the book?
I have been able to stick with my habits, and I try to be even more diligent about it. I don't think I succeed all the time. Like, for example, our dog barks at me if she sees me on my phone. And that's...
Well, can we all get dogs that do that for us as our own alarm?
It's hilarious. I mean, we just call it the rectangle. Like, oh, she's mad because you're looking at the rectangle. So I don't mean to act as if I'm this Puritan or this Luddite about it, or that it's perfect. But yes, I think that I know that I'm very grateful to have gone through the process of writing How to Break Up with Your Phone, because it really did force me to think about my own phone habits and change my habits and talk with my husband about our habits. And now, to do our best to role model what we want our daughter to see. She does not have her own phone, but I think it's really important for her to grow up with parents who are aware of their screen habits. And then the follow-up is that, I ended up with a lot more free time. Not that I was like the biggest phone user in the world, but even those of us who are quote average. I mean, the average person spending about 4 hours a day just on their phones. That adds up to 60 days a year. It's a quarter of your time awake if you're up for 16 hours a day. Like, there's a lot of free time. So I ended up asking myself, what is something I say I want to do, but supposedly don't have time for? Because I realized I do have time. And I ended up signing up for a guitar class. It's led to me meeting an entire group of adults who want to play together. Like, we're playing instruments, but we are playing together in the general sense of play as well, of doing something without a purpose in mind, just for the enjoyment of it. And that has brought me so much joy. And so if you were to ask me the biggest impact that How to Break Up With Your Phone has had on my life, it really has made me feel more alive, because it has encouraged me to ask questions that have resulted in me tapping into this broader community of people I never would have met, and discovering this joy. In this case, for me, it's playing music with other people that I didn't know was a source of joy for me. That's now become one of the most important and most nourishing aspects of my life.
Mm-hmm. And Catherine, lastly, I wonder if you can reflect briefly on the responses that you've had from readers who have taken this upon themselves. Because, going back to Drew and the other people I interviewed who decided to opt out of constant messages about news on their phone, one thing that kept coming over and over was this desire to connect back to their communities or their immediate lives and almost consciously make their world smaller, which was striking to me because the promise of this technology is to make our worlds bigger. So I wonder if there's anything like that has stood out to you and what people have shared with you as they've embarked on this journey to reorient their relationship to their phones.
What Drew said definitely resonates with me on a personal level, and then also in the terms of the feedback I've gotten from readers in the 6 years since the original edition came out. Because, the internet promised us this giant world of connections. And in many cases, it's delivered. It's just, I think that we didn't recognize that maybe we didn't want all those connections. And maybe we didn't want all of that information. Maybe it's too much for our brains and our like mental selves to deal with. And so, yes, I've heard from innumerable people around the world about the problems caused by their phones. So really heartbreaking things like, I feel like I can't connect with my friends and family. I feel like my life is empty. I feel like I'm controlled by my phone and I hate it. And then I would also say, yes, people who have made the choice to put the work in to become more intentional about their use of their phones. And in many cases, as you're saying, to shrink their worlds, are seeing the benefits. On a personal note, I can say that shrinking my own world, I thought maybe that would just help my mental health, but it hasn't just helped to stabilize it. It's actually really improved it in ways deeper than what I would have imagined.
Well, Catherine, thank you so much for taking time and joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Catherine Price is the author of How to Break Up With Your Phone and The Power of Fun. You can read more of her work on her Substack at catherineprice.substack.com. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. Today's show was produced by Sabby Robinson. It was mixed by Sam Baer and edited by Lucy Perkins and Maggie Penman. I'm Elahe Izadi. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from The Washington Post.